Scotland has a long and rich literary tradition, with authors such as Robert Louis Stevenson, Muriel Spark and Alistair Gray. The stories that we love help us understand who we are. Adventure stories, the supernatural, suspense, dark realism, family drama, romance, and of course, crime. Back in the summer, we invited you to vote for your favourite Scottish book. And tonight, we can reveal the result. Welcome to Scotland's favourite book. From an initial long list of 30 novels selected by a literary panel and curated by the Scottish Book Trust, we're about to divulge your top 10, including the all-important number 1. And along the way, some famous faces will be revealing their own top read. So to start, a 19th century Gothic classic and one of the first novels to explore the dark Scottish psyche.
Go thou then, said he, thou art called to a high vocation, to cleanse the sanctuary of thy God and this thy native land by the shedding of blood. Go thou then, like a ruling energy, a master spirit of desolation in the dwellings of the wicked. High shall be your reward both here and in the hereafter.
I first read the private memoirs and confessions of a justified sinner when I was in my 20s. It was gripping and extraordinary then. Rereading it, it is even more compelling. James Hogg's masterpiece was first published in 1824, but it strikes you as a very modern work. It is a complex tale of demonic possession, of the struggle between good and evil within one man's soul. The justified sinner in question, Robert Ringham, regards himself as one of the elect, one of the chosen few who without doubt will escape eternal damnation. What this means to him, ultimately, is that he can do anything. Soon after, young Ringham is told by his reverend father that he is one of the elect, he meets a shape-shifting, devilish figure walking in the woods, who assures him he really can do what he wants, including killing his own brother. I had a desire to slay him, it is true, and such a desire as a thirsty man has to drink. But at the same time, this longing desire was mingled with a certain terror, as if I had dreaded that the drink for which I longed was mixed with deadly poison. My mind had so weakened, or rather softened about this time, that my faith began a little to give way, and I doubted most presumptuously of the least tangible of all Christian tenets, that is, the infallibility of the elect. It is a tale framed within a tale, where the editor's narrative offers one version of events and Ringham's private memoirs and confessions the other. The author raises many questions that the reader is left to answer. Just what is going on? Is it Satan himself who walks the streets of Glasgow? Is it Satan or some disturbed psychological trait that's behind the dark and murderous deeds in an Edinburgh close? Who do we believe? The narrator or the justified sinner? What's amazing to me is how fresh and fast-paced Hogg's work is. Some may see it as a Gothic novel, some as a psychological crime thriller. It is certainly a scathing attack on dogmatic thought. With the Reverend Ringham and his son Robert, we see a lack of doubt, a clear moral certitude that foreshadows totalitarian mindsets of the 20th century and echoes religious fanatics of earlier and indeed current times. This is a terrific book. You should flood your library with requests for it.
Next up, a collection of stories, again set in the 19th century, about a certain sleuth who remains very much in our thoughts and on our screens, thanks to a Mr. Cumberbatch.
Well,
When young Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes in 1892, he couldn't have foreseen that his detective's popularity would go on to span 3 centuries, and that Holmes would become the most portrayed character ever on film and television.
Yeah, Sherlock, put it on. Just get it over with.
Cumberbatch is just one of more than 70 actors to have donned Sherlock's famous deerstalker hat.
Murder, my dear Watson.
It was while Conan Doyle was studying medicine here in his native Edinburgh that he met the man who would inspire his famous sleuth.
I used, as a student, to have an old professor, his name was Bell, who was extraordinarily quick at deductive work. He would make his diagnosis of the disease and also very often of the patient's nationality and occupation entirely by his power of observation.
Literature's first forensic detective proved so popular, Conan Doyle was kept busy writing Holmes stories for more than 40 years. The book at number 8 was published almost a century later, proving that as a nation we always love a good crime story. It was our introduction to a somewhat troubled Edinburgh detective. In Noughts and Crosses, Ian Rankin sets his SAS operative turned hard-drinking cop, John Rebus, on the hunt for a serial killer who leaves a trail of strangled young girls across Scotland's capital. The only clues, a series of knots made of string and matchstick crosses delivered through Rebus's door. Rankin saw Noughts and Crosses as a 20th century reworking of Robert Louis Stevenson's Jekyll and Hyde. Hidden behind Edinburgh's picture-perfect, elegant architecture lies a far darker vision of the city. First appearing in 1985, Rebus has gone on to become one of Britain's most popular fictional detectives and is still cracking cases 31 years later. 7th in your top 10, we're sticking in Edinburgh for a novel which garnered cult status in the 1990s and inspired a play, a film, and a killer soundtrack.
Trainspotting, the book and then the film, gave voice to young working-class Edinburgh.
Choose life, choose a job, choose a career, choose a family, choose a big television, choose washing machines, cars, compact displays and electrical tin openers.
I bought Trainspotting because it was one of those books that everyone was talking about at the time. It's one of those moments that happens maybe every 10 or 20 years. And it seemed to be one of those books that people that didn't normally read books were getting into. I remember getting on the plane to London and the air steward clocked the book in my hands and he looked down at it and he smiled and he said, "You're going to enjoy that." It just seemed to be a book that everyone was getting behind. Set in mid-1980s Leith, Irving Welsh's irreverent debut and the iconic film that soon followed tells the story of a group of so-called friends tied together by heroin addiction and their attempts to escape the boredom and brutality of their lives.
Never again, Swanee, I'm off the skag.
Are you serious?
Yeah, no more, I'm finished with that.
Irving Welsh's capacity to shock is something truly astonishing, and trust me, I am hard to shock. He lives in a grey area. His characters are morally ambiguous thieves, addicts, sociopaths, and yet somehow, he makes us sympathise with his anti-hero, Mark Renton. One of the scenes that stayed with me was when one of Renton's junkie pals loses her baby and he starts cooking up. Leslie comes into the room screaming. It's horrible. I wanted her to stop. Now. I couldn't handle this. Neenius could. No now. Not now. I never wanted anything more in my life than for her to stop screaming. The bairn's away, Dawn. Oh my God. She was a good mother. She loved that bairn. It's nobody's fault. Cot death and that. Happens all the time. Yeah, like say, cot death, man. Ken what I mean? Spud agreed. I feel that I love them all. Matty, Spud, Sick Boy, and Leslie. I want to tell them. I try, but it comes out as, I'm cooking. They look at us, Scoobied. That's me. I shrug my shoulders in self-justification. I go bend the living room. The gadgets move a few steps back and watch in silence as I cook. Leslie comes first, after me. That goes without saying. The moments of genuine shock in this book are easily in the double figures. You're entering this world of high drama, and yet it feels believable because it's written with such confidence. Irma Welsh was never scared of what people would think. Trainspotting never apologises for speaking in its own language of its own world, and that at the time was very un-Scottish.
Your sixth favourite book may not be set in the capital, but it was inspired by the city where its author still lives. It's the first in her magical series, and it sold more than 100 million copies worldwide and counting.
Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a bolt of lightning. In 1996, a then unknown J.K. Rowling bewitched readers the world over with her young wizard's very first adventure, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. On Harry's 11th birthday, he's saved from humdrum muggle, that's ordinary human to you and me, existence by the discovery he has magical powers and is summoned for his first year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. First-year students will require 3 sets of plain work robes, black, 1 pointed hat, black for day wear, 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar, 1 winter cloak, black, silver fastenings. Please note that all pupils' clothes should carry name tags. I first read the book when I was 23 and I loved it immediately. J.K. Rowling's tale of an orphan boy with special powers who's drawn into a complex adult world, who has to avenge his parents' killers, who has to fight evil personified by his nemesis Voldemort, is exceptional. The reason I love the book is the heart. I've followed each of the characters' emotional journeys like a roller coaster. I've cried at their loss, I've applauded their triumphs. The good thing is I can return to Harry's world whenever I like, through the books and the spectacular films. J.K. Rowling wrote most of the novel longhand in a few of the city's cafes. And legend has it she wrote some of it here at the Elephant House. But cafes weren't the only ingredient in the Harry Potter recipe. We're better than Edinburgh, with its gothic old town to inspire a tale of magic. Wingardium Leviosa! And it's in this historic Greyfriars Kirkyard that J.K. Rowling found the names of some of her characters, like Professor McGonagall, Professor Moody, and of course, Tom Riddle, also known as Voldemort.
Well, we're halfway through your top 10 now. And if Trainspotting depicted the dark, drug-fueled side of Edinburgh life, then the book at number 5 paints a very different picture of the city and features only the creme de la creme of educated young ladies. Set in 1932, Muriel Spark's most famous book presents a world on the cusp of change. With her forceful literary creation, Miss Jean Brodie leading the charge. And personified on film by Maggie Smith in an Oscar-winning performance.
Give me a girl at an impressionable age and she is mine for life. You girls are my vocation.
Miss Brodie's charm, glamour and unconventional ideas hold dangerous sway over the Brodie set at the Marcia Blaine School for Girls as they are introduced to a world of adult games beyond their ken and inspired to acts of bravery and betrayal. Our next novel takes its man-on-the-run hero on a breathless journey from London to the Galloway Hills and back again for an adventure thriller that's inspired numerous adaptations, not least by the master of suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock.
My notion was to get off to some wild district where I would be like a trapped rat in a city. I fixed on Galloway as the best place to go. It was the nearest wild part of Scotland.
This is the very spot in Mossdale where Buchan's anti-hero, Richard Hannay, gets off the train and starts his Scottish adventure. I first read The 39 Steps as a teenager and was swept away by the nail-biting pace, jeopardy, double-crossing and endlessly surprising plot twists that keep the reader and its hero guessing till the very last pages.
John Buchan published his most popular novel in 1915, a story so thrilling it inspired a young Alfred Hitchcock to create one of his best early films. It's a tale involving national secrets, German spies, and an innocent man framed for murder. Richard Hannay heads to the hills to escape both the police and the evil cabal of the Blackstone Gang, who are conspiring to ignite a global conflict.
I was in a wide semicircle of moorland with the Brown River as radius and the high hills forming the northern circumference. There was not a sign or sound of a human being, only the plashing water and the interminable crying of curlews. Yet oddly enough, for the first time, I felt the terror of the hunted on me.
As Hannay's chase propels him from hillside to country inn, he borrows, or steals, many a different man's identity in a desperate attempt to resist arrest and foil the villainous gang.
The 39 Steps is more than an ingenious page-turner, with its brilliant narration, spare prose style and wonderful turns of phrase. It feels fresh and contemporary. It's both spy, detective and adventure story, but its author defined the novel as a romance, where the incidents defy the probabilities and march just inside the borders of the possible.
Moving on to your top three, your third favourite Scottish novel is the author's semi-autobiographical masterwork. It's set in Glasgow in a nightmarish parallel city and fuses fantasy and reality in one man's desperate search for happiness.
A city on the banks of a shrunk river. A city with a 19th century square full of ugly statues. Am I right? That city is called Unthank. The calendar in Unthank is based on sunlight, but only administrators use it. The majority have forgotten the sun. Moreover, they have rejected the clock. They do not measure or plan. Their lives are regulated by simple appetite, varied by the occasional impulse. Not surprisingly, nobody is well there. It may have taken Alistair Gray 30 years to write, but when Lanark was finally published in 1981, it was a game changer for Scottish fiction. Gray's visionary modern classic transcends categorization and genre, as it flits between surreal science fiction and naturalism, following the journey of flawed hero Duncan Thaw, aka Lanark, through two divergent worlds. I first read Lanark when I came to live in this city 10 years ago, and I love its honesty about being stuck in a dysfunctional male body while striving to make art and striving to get close to the gorgeous, bright, young, arty females that he, Duncan, so desires. They were late for the film. It had love scenes, which made him very conscious of Marjorie beside him. He leaned toward her, but she sat so upright and stared so straightforward that he dispiritedly brought out the chocolates and resignedly popped one at intervals into her mouth. I love that his epic vision of Scotland is no the mythical hills and glens of the Highlands, but this city of Glasgow where he grew up and still lives today. And in its colossal scale, it has this real Blakean quality for me to its artistry and its scope that makes Glasgow seem both heroic and darkly satanic. It's a very simple tale, really, but told with such timeless imagination. And that's why it gets my vote.
Your runner-up at number 2 was the first book to be published by this writer in 1984. It's a murderous tale of a psychopathic teenager and his family's dark secrets, played out on a remote Scottish island. In Ian Banks' debut, The Wasp Factory, 16-year-old Frank Coldholm is the self-appointed lord of his island, where he lives with his experimental scientist father and violent, unhinged brother on the loose from a psychiatric hospital. Frank occupies his days hunting small animals and prophesying the future through bizarre, savage rituals. A highly original Gothic horror, Banks's novel is a study in obsession, blood, and death.
I looked for the two most eccentric things I'd ever done. One was building dams, and the other one was being a schoolboy bomb maker. So I knew I could write fairly convincingly about those things, so I put those into the book, but everything else is made up, honest.
The Wasp Factory showcased the late Ian Banks' brilliantly bizarre imaginative powers and became the first of many cult classics and science fiction epics by this prolific author. And so finally, we come to your favourite Scottish novel. It's an early 20th century classic, again set in a remote community in the northeast of Scotland. Your number one choice is the story of a farmer's daughter caught up in the conflict between the traditional way of life and the modern world.
Below and around where Chris Guthrie lay, the June moors whispered and rustled and shook their cloaks, yellow with broom and powdered faintly with purple. That was the heather, but not the full passion of its colour yet. And in the east, against the cobalt blue of the sky, lay the shimmer of the North Sea. That was by Bervie. Sunset Song tells the story of young heroine Chris Guthrie as she comes of age in the tight-knit farming community of fictional Kinraddy in author Lewis Grassick Gibbon's native Aberdeenshire. I first read Sunset Song when I was in my early teens, so maybe about 13 or 14, and it resonated with me, firstly because it's a wonderful story, beautifully written, but it also said something about the history of the country I grew up in and resonated very strongly with me as a young Scottish woman, and I think its themes are timeless to this day. I think it's a very early feminist novel. She's just a very, very strong character. At a time, the Sunset Song was written in the early 1930s, at a time when, not many books would have portrayed a female character in that way. Two Chrissies there were that fought for her heart and tormented her. You hated the land and the coarse speak of the folk, and learning was brave and fine one day, and the next you'd waken with the peewits crying across the hills, deep and deep, crying in the heart of you, and the smell of the earth in your face. Almost you'd cry for that. Chris, as a character, does personify the story of Scotland. We see her struggling to come to terms with some of the changes taking place around her. And the land changes. Their parks and their steadings are a desolation where the sheep are pastured. We are told that great machines come soon to till the land, and the great herds come to feed on it. The crofter has gone, the man with the house and steading of his own, and the land closer to his heart than the flesh of his body. Nothing, it has been said, is true, but change, nothing abides. He did something quite innovative and groundbreaking in that he used his own language in that sense in a fictional setting, and that was for me part of the mystique and the magic of the book. I grew up in Ayrshire, so opened my eyes to parts of the country that I hadn't until that point been very familiar with. Tragically, Grassick Gibbon died just 3 years after the first book in his Scott Square trilogy was published. But thanks to school reading lists and radio, TV and film versions, many of us have grown up with Sunset Song, and his masterpiece lives on. I'm delighted to champion my favourite Scottish book, and as it turns out, Scotland's favourite book, Sunset Song. So to one of my heroines, the fantastic, wonderful Chris Guthrie, congratulations on making it to #1.
So that's it. Sunset Song by Lewis Grassick Gibbon is Scotland's favourite book. Now, if you haven't read it, or any of the others in the top 10, then I do hope you're inspired to do so. And if you'd like to see the result of all 30 in the long list, then go to bbc.co.uk/Scotland's favourite book. Good night and happy reading.